Hello, everyone, and welcome back. So let's go ahead and start. Let's start with some meditation first. So wherever you are, get comfortable in your meditation posture. So when we're meditating, the first instruction is always to have a comfortable seat. So you're basically stuck with the seat you have now because you're already sitting there. And then sweep the area around, set out some attractive offerings, and so forth. Anyway, wherever you are, get comfortable in your meditation posture. So there's usually 7 or 8 points to the posture, starting basically from down, bottom, and going up, the bottom of the body, going up. So the first point is to have the legs crossed, either in full lotus posture or half lotus posture, or just ordinary cross-legged posture. Or if you're seated in a chair, to have your feet planted comfortably on the floor. So we want the bottom part of our body making good contact with the cushion or the seat that we're sitting on, so that we have a very stable base to support our body. And then the second point is our torso or spine being straight and erect, right? So sitting straight up, not falling to the right or left or to the front or the back, but being kind of centered and balanced. And the third point of the posture is to have our shoulders even and spread broadly so that our chest is open, we can breathe easily. So we don't want our shoulders hunched forward because that impairs our breath and causes us to lean forward. So we want to sit erect, but also when as we sit straight up and erect, don't strain the muscles to be stiff and tight and straight. We want to balance our torso on our pelvis and our legs so that we can relax all the muscles of our back and our chest, but still stay straight up. And the shoulders broad and open. And then the hands resting in our lap. So usually we put the right hand on top of the left, and then the tips of the thumbs touching like this. And then just rest your hands in front of your navel on your lap in a way that's comfortable. And then our head tilted slightly forward. So we elongate the back of the neck a little bit and then tuck the chin in just a little bit. So this helps to put the head in a more balanced posture, a balanced kind of position on top of our neck and our shoulders. So we don't want our head falling back or falling forwards into left or right. So it helps to balance the weight of our head on top of our neck by tucking our chin in just a little bit and elongating the back of our neck. So then we have a straight line from the crown of our head straight down to our coccyx, or to the base of our spine. So the points of the posture so far we've covered are our legs, our spine and torso being erect, shoulders being broad, and the hands resting in the lap is 4th, and then the 5th, our head tilted slightly forwards is the 5th. And then the 6th is our eyes. So we want to direct our gaze down at about a 45-degree angle towards the ground or the space in front of us. And then let our eyes rest unfocused in space, right? So we want to kind of let our eyelids just relax the area around our eyes. So our eyelids naturally kind of half close. But we want to leave them open just a little bit to let some light in to prevent us from becoming drowsy and sleepy. Although that said, sometimes If your mind is very distracted, very agitated and excited, it is okay to close the eyes sometimes. And if our mind is very drowsy and we're falling asleep, it's okay to open the eyes and just look up for a few seconds and then bring the gaze back down to help refresh in our mind, to wake ourselves up. But the default kind of position of the eyes is with the gaze directed at a 45-degree angle down and relaxing the eyes so that they're half closed. And then drawing our, so we don't want to look at anything with our eyes while meditating, right? I mean, in the sense that we're looking at a specific point on the ground or an object in front of us. So we want to just kind of pull our gaze back and let our gaze rest unfocused in space. And you can experiment, how far you pull your gaze back. You can try to kind of pull your gaze back all the way to the tip of your nose and try to focus your gaze at the tip of your nose, or just be aware of your nose appearing in your peripheral vision. Or you can kind of extend your gaze out further away from you. Anyway, so the 6th point is the eyes. And then the 7th point is the mouth and teeth. So just especially make sure to relax your jaws and let your mouth and teeth rest in a natural position. So generally when we're meditating, we breathe through the nose. So we keep our lips sealed, keep the mouth shut, but we don't want to like clench your teeth or press the lips together. So hopefully, for most people, I think they just let the mouth relax and the lips naturally kind of close. And then so sometimes the tongue, sometimes it's included with the mouth and teeth. So then that would make 7 points. But you can also just separate the tongue as an 8th point. So the tongue the position of the tongue is kind of funny. Usually we touch the tip of the tongue just to the roof of the mouth, just behind the front teeth. So this helps to prevent the mouth from drying out, and also makes it so if we abide in a deep meditative state that saliva doesn't come out of the mouth. Also, I think it has something to do with the prana or the wind, making a more smooth flow. So the whole point of this meditation posture is so that we can place our body in a comfortable position where every part of our body can relax, so that we don't have to give, and we can just stay in that position for a long time, for the duration of the meditation session, so that we don't have to give our mental attention to what's happening with the body, and we can focus instead on what's going on with our mind. So take a few deep breaths and then breathe naturally. And as you take a few deep breaths, though, kind of visualize or imagine that any tension, so we can scan through our body from the crown of the head down to the base of our spine, down to the soles of our feet. And as you exhale, imagine any tightness or tension or discomfort or disease or sickness flowing out. And then as you inhale, imagine very rejuvenating, nourishing, fresh, clear kind of energy comes in with the breath and pervades every part of your body, causing all of your body to be feel healthy and light and nourished and kind of alive, full of energy. Mm. So then gradually focus your attention within. So why don't we begin by looking at our sense consciousness. So we can divide mind into two fundamental different types, which is our sense consciousness, which means like our eye consciousness, ears, nose, tongue, and body, right? So we have five sense consciousness. So those are one type, sense consciousness, and then the other type is mental consciousness. So before we focus on mental consciousness, just observe your sense consciousness, your five sense consciousness, right? So just observe how you see things with your eyes. So in the present moment, visual objects appear to your eyes. And then with your ear sense consciousness, how you're aware of sounds. Maybe just look at those two first for a couple minutes. So as you observe your eye sense consciousness and your ear sense consciousness, so try to be aware, not only, it's okay, you can be aware of the things that appear to your eyes, right? Without looking around the room or something, but just try to, let your gaze rest unfocused in space, but be aware, whatever's in front of you is appearing, the shapes and the colors, the visual objects, they're appearing, but try to turn your attention more towards, the fact of being aware of those visual objects, right? That experience of seeing. So that I sense consciousness, which is aware, right? Which enables us to experience visual objects. So try to be more aware of that experience, that consciousness which experiences visual objects in the present moment. And then the same with sounds, right? The same with our ear sense consciousness. So also be aware of the sounds that appear to your ears, but also the experience of hearing those different sounds. And then do the same with your other three sense consciousness, your nose sense consciousness. So be aware of experiencing smells. See if there's any sense of smells that you experience. are experiencing in the present moment. And then tastes. So spend some time putting your attention to your tongue sense consciousness. See if there's any flavors or tastes that you can experience, you're experiencing. And then finally, your body sense consciousness, and see if there's any physical sensations you're experiencing anywhere in your body. And just try to be aware of that. Be aware of that mind which experiences physical sensations. So just review in a minute. Just touch on each of the 5 sense consciousness briefly again, and try to be clear just kind of what they are. Right. So there's the eye consciousness, which is experiencing in the present moment, right? Experiencing visual objects. The ear sense consciousness, experiencing sounds as they arise. And then the nose sense consciousness, experiencing sense. The tongue sense consciousness, experiencing tastes or flavors. And the body sense consciousness, experiencing textures or physical feelings like hot and cold, soft and rough, and so forth. So now I'll ask you a couple questions about the sense consciousness, those 5 sense consciousness. One, so the first is, do they experience objects that do not exist in the present moment? Right? So sounds or visual objects that existed just 5 minutes ago, do your sense consciousness experience those objects? Now, I guess we could say, do they experience those objects now? Or another way of asking that question, maybe it's more clear, would be, do your sense consciousness, do they have access to memories? Right? So does your eye sense consciousness itself remember what you saw earlier? Do memories appear to your eye sense consciousness, or do memories appear to your nose sense consciousness? And then a second question is, do your sense consciousness have thoughts? Right? So when you see something with your eyes, and then you think about it, think like, what is this? Or this is, this is attractive, this is not attractive, this is good, this is bad. Is that your eye sense consciousness that's thinking? Or when you hear a sound and the sound recognizes, oh, that's a bird, or that's a bell. Is that your ear sense consciousness that's thinking about the sound, or is it something else? So you can look with regard to all 5 of your sense consciousness. Do they conceptualize and think about, reflect on the things, the objects that they appear, the objects that they perceive? Mm. And then finally, so now think about something that might happen in the future. Right? Try to imagine something that you might do later today, tonight, wherever you are, like 1 hour in the future, or 12 hours in the future, or several days in the future. Think about or imagine something that might happen in the future. Okay, so now that mind that's thinking about something that will happen or might happen in the future, is that mind any of your 5 sense consciousness? Is it your eye sense consciousness and so forth up to your body sense consciousness? Or is it something else? Mm. Okay, so hopefully you can see that it's very clear when we think about the future. The future is more clear, that mind thinking about the future is not one of our 5 sense consciousness. It's not our eye consciousness thinking about the future or ear sense consciousness. So that's called our mental consciousness. So the sixth consciousness is called the mental consciousness, or mental sense consciousness. Yeah, it's better we just stick with mental consciousness. So it's not, so it's not one of the five sense consciousness. So when we meditate, and when we're meditating on the nature of the mind, we primarily want to focus on the mental consciousness. So it's important to recognize how it's different, right, from any of the sense consciousness. So it helps to look at some examples first. So these three examples of thinking about things in the future, and also looking at memories when we remember things in the past, that's exclusively our mental consciousness. And then when we think about things, when we conceptualize about things, oh, this is a mouse, this is a computer, that's the sound of a bird. I like this, I don't like that. So all of these concepts that arise in our mind, the mental chatter we have in our mind, again, thinking about the future, thinking about the past, all of that is part of our mental consciousness. So just abiding, keeping your attention in the present moment. Try to see if you can, pull your attention away from your five sense consciousness and just focus on your mental consciousness, as it unfolds or as it functions in the present moment. So just try to do that for a minute. See if you can just be aware of your mental consciousness as it's functioning in the present moment. Okay, so relax your attention there. So one thing that helps to do this, to identify mental consciousness, is to understand the causes for the sense consciousness, the five sense consciousness, versus the cause for the mental consciousness. So the five sense consciousness are defined in terms of their cause, right? So just to kind of simplify the definition, basically our I sense consciousness is a mind that arises in dependence upon the physical eye, right? So it arises upon the meeting of, I can give it, meet one. So it's a consciousness that arises in dependence upon the physical eye, basically. So it's when a visual object, so like in front of me is my laptop, my keyboard, it's the most obvious visual object. So when light from the keyboard, we can say when the keyboard or the laptop or the light from the laptop, either way, when it strikes the eye, its independence upon that object, the light from the laptop coming in contact with the physical eye, then in Buddhism they don't go into a detailed description of the brain and the nerve, what happens with the rods in the eye and the neurons and so forth. But you can add that all into the story if you want. But basically, so there's light from the visual object strikes the eye, and then independence upon the physical organ, the eye, we generate an awareness of a visual object, right? So basically sounds, and not sounds, right? We can't see sounds, right? So shapes and colors. So basically, in short, the eye sense consciousness is a consciousness which arises independence upon its main cause, right? Or one of its main, how do you say? I forget. Empowering condition. Oh, it's called an empowering condition, which is the physical eye, the eye sense power. So basically, you can think of just the physical eye, or the function of the physical eye, which allows us to perceive visual objects. So independence upon the physical eye, then we can perceive visual things. But those visual things that we see, uncommon empowering condition. Thank you, Paul. But the eye sense consciousness, it doesn't think about those things we can see, right? So it doesn't think like, oh, this is a keyboard, or this is well lit, or this is attractive, or this is not attractive. And it actually doesn't have those reactions either. Those kind of reactions of attraction or revulsion, or curiosity, or just boredom. That's all mental consciousness reacting. So similarly, then, our ear sense consciousness, its uncommon empowering condition, is the ear sense power. So again, that's like a subtle physical form that exists in the ear, which when sound waves strike that, then it enables us to have an awareness, have an experience of sounds. And then same with the nose. So the nose sense power arises independence upon its uncommon empowering condition, which is the nose sense power, which is kind of, again, a subtle physical form in the nose, which enables us to experience sense. And the same with the tongue, and the same with the body sense power. So basically, when we see that we're, an instance of an awareness is directly experiencing physical objects in the environment around us, either seeing or hearing or tasting or smelling or touching, in a non-conceptual way, just non-conceptually experiencing physical objects, either that are aspects of our own body or aspects of the physical environment around us, right? Then that's a sense consciousness. So when we're meditating on, and those, sense consciousness, those are all instances of mind, right? So when we talk about meditating on the mind, meditating on the conventional nature of the mind, ultimate nature of the mind, first of all, we have to define mind, right? So that's what I'm working towards here. But there's many, many different instances of mind, many different kinds of mind, right? So the first and most obvious are the sense consciousness, right? This five sense consciousness. And it's with these five sense consciousnesses that we most, you can say, ordinarily, we get information about the outside world, right? About the physical world around us that we inhabit. So then, but it's a little difficult then to distinguish between the sense consciousness and the mental consciousness, right? So when we're meditating on the nature of the mind, we primarily want to meditate, we're focusing on the mental consciousness. In general, when we're meditating ever, we're primarily using the mental consciousness. We're not using the sense consciousness, right? So meditation is always primarily done with mental consciousness. So it's important to distinguish between the two, right? So one easy way to distinguish is to look at concepts, right? Because the sense consciousness is non-conceptual. They never conceptualize, they never think about anything. They're kind of stupid in that way. They're kind of foolish. They only just directly perceive things as they appear to them without any further, they don't have any ability to further analyze or reflect on, any in a more subtle way about things. They just merely receive appearances and are aware of those appearances. That's all. So mental consciousness, whenever we think about things, we remember things in the past, we think about things that might happen in the future, and also we rationalize. We use reason, or even we irrationally think about things, right? We just make judgments for no reason whatsoever. That's all mental consciousness, right? So it's quite easy to see in the case of thinking about things that have happened in the past. So that's why the first question I asked you was, things that you've seen that you maybe in relation to the I consciousness, things we've seen in the past. If we think about those things now, are those things appearing to the I consciousness? Well, it's not so easy to answer that question, but the easy way to answer is that no, because those things are not appearing to our eyes, right? To appear to our eye sense consciousness, now something has to appear to our eyes. So things that we've seen, like this morning or earlier today or yesterday or whatever, they don't appear to our eyes now. They appeared to our eyes in the past at that time. And based on having that, that visual experience at that time, based on having an I sense consciousness in the past, now we have a mental consciousness that can remember the experience of seeing things and before, right? So, one unique feature about mental consciousness is it can experience any object that exists whatsoever, right? So we can compare that with sense consciousness. For example, our eye consciousness, can it perceive sounds, right? With your eye sense consciousness, can you see sounds? Generally, no. Some people, I don't want to get too complicated, but some people do have the experience of having their five sense consciousnesses kind of wired together in ways that most people don't. That they do have some kind of, it said some people, they do have like a visual experience of sounds, or some people have an auditory experience of things that they see or something. But for generally speaking, for most people, and even that's quite different than what we're talking about in terms of seeing sounds, right? So like, think of, I don't know, sound. Well, you guys are all muted, so I can't hear what you're hearing. But I can hear like birds. There's always birds outside my room. But I can't see those sounds of the birds. Right? I can hear them with my ears. And also, I can see you all on the screen in the Zoom room, but I can't hear you all because you're all muted. And even if I could hear you, it would be your voice that I hear. I can't hear like your eyes and your nose and your beard or your hair. I can't hear those things, right? I would only be able to hear sounds that are in the environment around you if you're speaking. So our sense consciousness are different from our mental consciousness in that our five sense consciousness can only experience very narrow ranges of objects, right? Our eye sense consciousness can only experience visual objects and not other things, not sounds, not tastes, not smells, and not physical tactile objects like rough or smooth, hot or cold, so forth. Likewise, our ear sense consciousness, it can only experience sounds, right? It cannot experience colors. It cannot see shapes. It cannot feel hot and cold. And it can't taste tastes or smell scents, right? Like, can your ear sense consciousness experience, say, the smell of ginger tea, for example? I think the scent of ginger tea. Can you, as much as you listen to the ginger tea, you'll never be able to taste it with your ears, right? You can only do that with your tongue. So like that. So our sense consciousness are very limited in the range of phenomena they can experience. Whereas our mental consciousness can experience everything that exists, right? Anything that exists whatsoever can be experienced with our mental consciousness. So to come back to the example of thinking about trying to remember something that we saw earlier today. So what's something I saw earlier today? Well, in the break time, it rained a little bit here. So I saw the rain falling, see in the break, which is kind of significant because it hasn't rained here in like almost a month. So it's really nice to have the rain falling a little bit, although it didn't much. But so that visual experience of seeing the rain fall. So again, when we say that, what exactly do we mean in a more precise way? So even when I say, like, I see the rain, actually what appears to the eyes, we can say the rain falling, appears to the eyes. But what do we mean really precisely is that the shapes and the colors, there's a change in color when raindrops fall. You see the kind of light that they reflect. So that has a color, and then there's kind of a shape to it, and there's a movement. So that's what appears to the eyes, that shape and color, and you can say the movement. And then based on that, we label rain, and we can say we see rain, or see such and such an object. So that's why we say we see things. Because also it can say I hear the rain. So there's a certain sound, when the raindrops hit the leaves on the trees around here, or the pavement and so forth. You can say you hear the rain, but what do you mean is I hear that the certain sounds associated with rain. The sounds are not the rain is not the sounds, but they're associated with one another. And therefore we label, we hear rain. So that those sounds appear to my ear consciousness, and then the visual aspect of the rain appears to the eye consciousness. But all of those things, and then there's a certain smell, when the rain hits the pavement, you smell a certain smell, or the smell of rain in the air, when it contacts the leaves and the grass and so forth. So so there's a certain smell. There's a smell of rain. So, but all of those, so that appears again to the nose sense consciousness. But all of those objects, all those aspects, the visual aspect, the auditory aspect, the olfactory aspect of the rain, all of those appear to the mental consciousness. So that's why, and that's most clear in the present moment. It's a little bit more difficult to parse out the mental consciousness from the sense consciousness. But when we think about the past, it's very clear, that all those aspects of the rain, they don't appear to my eye consciousness or ears and nose now, but they appear to my mind, right? So in what sense do they appear to my mind? As memories, right? They appear. And which aspect of my mind are they appearing to? They're not appearing to any of my sense consciousness, right? Because the sense consciousness only perceives objects as they exist now, in the present moment, right? The sense consciousness, or five sense consciousness, they don't have access to things that happened in the past, or things that, and they don't consider or cannot think about, or apprehend things that might happen in the future, right? So our sense consciousness only experience objects, as they appear in the present moment. So whenever we're thinking about something we experienced in the past, or thinking about something we might experience in the future, that's always mental consciousness, right? So that's one easy way to identify mental consciousness from sense consciousness, is that whenever we're conceptualizing, we're thinking about something, it's always mental consciousness. Whenever we're thinking, whenever we're remembering things that happened in the past, that's always mental consciousness. Whenever we're thinking about things that might happen in the future, that's always mental consciousness, right? So that's kind of the easy way, to identify mental consciousness. But then it's a little more difficult, the last thing we did in that meditation session. So just to review, right, what we did in that session was, first we just tried to, bring our attention to our eye consciousness and our ear consciousness, and experience visual objects and auditory objects in the present moment. And instead of focusing on the things we're experiencing, the things we see or hear, to focus on the mind that experiences those, right? So the sense consciousness that's experiencing those objects. And then we did the same with regard to our nose, tongue, and body sense consciousness. Try to more clearly distinguish each of those, right? And then basically I asked you 3 different questions about those sense consciousness, which were, I think the first question was, do they experience things that we perceived in the past? And then I think the second question was, do they experience things that might happen in the future? And then do they think about their objects? I think that was the 3 questions I asked, but correct me if I'm mistaken. Do they think about, or do they make judgments about, or conceptualize about the objects that appear to them? So in all 3 cases, the answer should be no, right? But we don't want to jump to foregone conclusions. Rather, we want to look at our own experience and see, how it appears to us, if that really appears to be the case or not. And then what did we do? And then I think I asked you to think about something in the future that might happen in the future. And what did I do then? Yeah, I forget what we did then. What were we thinking about the future? Well, maybe I was just, because that is a clear example of the mental consciousness, right? It's not any of the sense consciousness. But the thing I think we tried to do at the end was try to be present in the present moment, right? So what's difficult to do, what I find in my own experience and also in trying to explain to other people, to guide other people in meditation on the mind, what's quite difficult, initially, is to, when we keeping our awareness in the present moment, to focus on our mental consciousness in the present moment, right, as opposed to our sense consciousness. One reason for that is because, our sense consciousness, they make a very strong impact on our mind, and we're used to putting our attention outwards, right? We're used to sending our attention out to be curious about, to notice, to be aware of things we see, things we hear. And then we're thinking at the same time, but it's usually often the case that our thinking process is kind of going on more in the background. We don't often just sit and look at our own thoughts, for example. So in the present moment, when we keep our awareness in the present moment and meditate on the mind, the first thing to do is to identify our sense consciousness and then take our attention away from those. So we want to take our attention away from our sense consciousness and put our energy, or another way to say it is take our energy as much as we can away from our sense consciousness. So when we're meditating, we don't want to pay attention to the physical sensations we feel in our body. Although, those perceptions will arise, but we want to try to, just let them go, right? Not become fascinated with and obsessed about those. So physical sensations, that's body sense consciousness. And then things we smell, no sense consciousness. And things we hear, especially that's one of the biggest distractions, is things that we hear, right? Often I think we've all, if you meditate for a little while, you'll inevitably have the experience of some annoying sound keeps arising in the background, like a dog barking, or the refrigerator turning on, or I don't know, someone humming, or the person in the next apartment, like walking around with big clog shoes or something like that, and it'll drive you crazy because you can't stop paying attention to the sound. So sound is quite difficult to let go of. But in any case, whenever we're meditating, we want to take our attention away from the sense consciousness and objects that appear to sense consciousness. We want to focus our energy on our mental consciousness. So, right. So when we're doing analytical meditation, where we're intentionally thinking about something, it's quite easy, right? Because whenever we're thinking about something, that is mental consciousness. So it's easy, if we're addressing a set of questions or analyzing a certain issue, which we'll do later more of, or even if we're trying to generate a particular mental attitude, like trying to generate an attitude of love, loving kindness, or compassion, or gratitude. Those are all activities of our mental consciousness, not of our sense consciousness, right? So when we're trying to actively do something with our mind, and that involves conceptualization, thinking, and intentionally, acting with our mind. Generally, that's all mental consciousness. But what we want to do also is just practice placement meditation, right? So there's two basic kinds of meditation. There's analytical meditation and placement meditation. Analytical meditation is more analogous to vipassana. So it's where we're actively, thinking, rationalizing, remembering, thinking, imagining about the future, using reasoning and intellect and concepts to meditate on an issue in different ways. Generating an elaborate visualization is also one kind of analytical meditation. And then generating a certain attitude, generating like a positive emotion, intention, like loving kindness or generosity or patience. Those are all also analytical meditations, where we're actively trying to generate a certain mental state. Those are all different kinds of analytical meditations. But then the other kind of, so there's analytical meditation, and then the other kind is placement meditation. Placement meditation is analogous to shamatha. So placement meditation means where we, we choose a meditation object, and then we simply keep our attention focused on the object without further elaboration, right? So without engaging in analysis, without engaging in thought, without trying to, do anything more, we simply try to keep our attention focused on an object without, without wavering. So we try to maintain an extended continuity of awareness of an object without further conceptualizing or analyzing, doing anything else. So that's placement meditation. So placement meditation, again, is where we just keep our attention focused on an object without engaging in any further elaborate kind of mental process. Whereas analytical meditation is where we also focus on object, but we engage with the object in a more dynamic way, right? By thinking about it in different ways, or trying to generate the object or relate to the object in different ways. Right? So that's all analytical meditation. So in both cases, though, we try to use our mental consciousness. So like I was saying, when we're doing analytical meditation, where we're doing something dynamic with our mind in relation to an object or trying to generate a certain mental state, it's quite easy to distinguish the mental consciousness from the sense consciousness, because our sense consciousness can't do all those dynamic things, right? But when we're doing placement, we also want to do placement meditation, where we simply practice being aware of our mental consciousness in the present moment. That's quite there when we do that. So you'll see it's a little bit more difficult to distinguish the mental consciousness from the sense consciousness. All right. But I'll give you a chance to ask questions now if you have any questions, and then we'll try to practice a little bit again. Okay. I'm coming to you, Paul. Yeah.
Hi, can you hear me?
I can.
Yeah, okay, great, thanks. Hi. Yes, I've got a question. We've been debating it here for a while. In terms of if we take the mind itself, the conventional nature of mind, as the object of focus to cultivate calm abiding. So from the perspective of the proponents of sutra, we say that if it is an established base, it's necessarily either the appearing object to a conceptual consciousness or the appearing object to a direct. So if it is an impermanent phenomena, it's necessarily the appearing object to a direct perceiver. Yeah, so you see where I'm going? So it follows that the conventional nature of mind, it follows that it appears to a direct perceiver. And
right.
But I think so.
Well, the main direct perceiver that would apprehend the conventional nature of mind for the sutra school would be a self-knowing direct perceiver. What is it? Self-cognizer.
Self-known direct valid cognizer.
Self-knowing direct valid cognizer. Yeah.
New incontrovertible knower, free from conceptuality, that's directed only inwardly and is just apprehender. So it just takes, yeah.
Well, I mean, that's because the sutra school from the sutra school on up to the autonomous middle way school, they all posit this. Not all, but mostly they posit this self-knowing direct perceiver. And it's kind of a, it's kind of a seventh category almost, right? I mean, it's more like a mental consciousness, but it's direct perceiver. It's always non-conceptual. So for the sutra school, when we're meditating on the conventional nature of the mind, you'd have to posit that, that self-knowing direct perceiver, probably the one that goes with the conventional nature of the mind. But I'm sure you have a follow-up question, or your question is not finished.
Yeah, no, the question's not finished. So yeah, we didn't put it down to a sense direct, a self-knowing direct perceiver. What we thought was that so it's not going to appear to a sense direct perceiver. We definitely don't have a yogic direct perceiver. So it's mental direct perceiver, but that's going to be an inattentive awareness. So that's not going to work. So then do we say that actually put into one side appearing object, do we say what appears? And is it the conventional nature of mind appears to the conceptual consciousness?
Yeah, they might want to say that. I mean, in the sutra school, they might say, mostly when or for an ordinary person, when they're meditating on the conventional nature of the mind, they're just looking at it conceptually. They might say that, but that, I agree. It's not really fully satisfactory, because we do feel like we directly experience our own minds in the present moment, non-conceptually. It does seem like it, right?
Yeah, because we've debated this for about a year here, and Geshe Gelsen is pretty adamant that it's it appears to a conceptual consciousness, which means that you take that what appears is the meaning generality of the conventional nature of mind, and that's permanent.
Right.
And that, from a personal experience, it doesn't seem like you're taking the meaning generality of the mind.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's definitely, when you're thinking about, your experience of your own mind in the past or the future, of course it's conceptual, but when you're really focused in the present moment, just experiencing your own experience of being aware, it very much seems like, you're having a non-conceptual experience of your mind, right? I mean, that's where I think school gives an explanation. Each of the schools have their own weaknesses, right? So I think this is really one of the primary weaknesses of the Sutra school, is that they don't, from within their school, they don't have a good explanation of that. But that's why you find in the consequentialist middle way school, they're much more relaxed about, mental direct perceivers, that ordinary beings can have mental direct perceivers. Right. I mean, the same, but what does Geshe Gelton say about, like, experiencing our eye consciousness? Because we definitely experience, our eye consciousness. We are aware now that we see things, right? But again, that eye consciousness is not an object of any of the five sense consciousness. But the Sutra school would say, well, it's an object of the self-knowing direct perceiver that accompanies the eye consciousness, right?
For the eye consciousness apprehending square.
Yeah, just like looking at the Zoom room.
Yeah. So the self-knowing.
It would be the self-knowing direct perceiver that accompanies the eye consciousness. So for the rest of you, I know Paul's in Nalanda in France. He's studying Logic and Tardik and these things. Actually, I was in France. How was it? Like a year and a half ago. Yeah. And when I was leaving, Paul took me to the airport and he debated me. I was trying to remember what you were debating me on, but I just remember I lost badly. But I don't remember what you were asking me.
You said that the person was the object apprehended by an eye consciousness, which would mean that the person is either a shape or a color.
Right, yeah. I asked some of my classmates about it when I got back here. I got it sorted out, I think. Anyway, so what? Just to let me fill the rest of the info. So when we're talking about sense consciousness, there's a big question among the different Buddhist philosophical schools about, well, how does consciousness know itself, right? So there's 6 different kinds of consciousness again, right? The five sense consciousness of eye, ear, nose, tongue, and body, and then the mental consciousness. So, the fact that it's the eye sense consciousness perceives visual objects and knows visual objects, okay, that's fine. But then what is it that knows that we're seeing something, right? So now when we look at the computer screen in front of us, it's the eye sense consciousness that perceives the computer screen. But what is it? And now, like, if we close our eyes, or 5 minutes later, we turn the computer off, we have a memory that we saw the computer screen. So one is, what explains, how do we generate that memory of seeing the object of the eye consciousness, seeing the computer screen? But additionally, we not only remember seeing the computer screen, but we can remember, we not only remember the computer screen as it appeared, but we have a memory of the experience of seeing the computer screen, right? So we can look at your memories. Like whenever we remember, perceiving a sound or a visual object or any object, we have a memory both of the object and a memory of experiencing that object, whether seeing it or hearing it or tasting it. So we have to account for both kinds of memories, right? So it's because I see something now, like maybe I'll just stick with the rain I saw earlier. I can remember the rain falling earlier. And I can explain that because, I saw it, I heard it, and I smelled it and so forth. But I also have the memory of seeing the rain and of hearing the rain, right? So you see that distinction between remembering an object that we experience versus remembering the experience of, perceiving the object. They're 2 different things. So generally it's the sense consciousness itself, it can generate, it makes an imprint in the mind, and then that enables us to have the memory of the object. But how do we have a memory of experiencing the object, right? So that is explained different ways by different schools. So now when we're talking about the self-knowing direct perceiver, according to the Sutra school, which when we initially study the mind in Buddhism, we usually study according to the Sutra school. So according to the Sutra school, every main mind, so every sense consciousness, it has together with it, it has like a sidekick whose only function is to experience that mind itself, right? So you think like You can think like, like a motorcycle with that, what's that side thing that people put on? It's like kind of a passenger on the side. These days, nobody does, but I don't remember the name of it. Anyway, that side thing you put on. So, sidecar, I don't know.
Cart.
I never had one. A what?
Cart. Cart.
Anyway, a cart. Okay, maybe in Wales or something. A sidecar. Yes. Okay. So yeah. So when we have an eye consciousness perceiving, like the laptop computer, according to the Sutra school, we also have a self-knowing direct perceiver that goes along with that eye consciousness, and its only function is to perceive that eye consciousness that perceives the laptop, right? Or then when I turn and I look at the door to my right, I have an eye consciousness perceiving the door, right? So there's the object, the door, there's the sense consciousness, my eye consciousness, and then there's a self-knowing direct perceiver that goes along with the eye consciousness, and it perceives my eye consciousness as it experiences the door, right? So, so for the Sutra school, every kind of main mind has this kind of, and it's this kind of self-knowing direct perceiver that goes along with it. And it's this self-knowing direct perceiver that enables us to have a memory of experiencing things, right? So it's when I see, like when I saw the rain earlier, the eye consciousness seeing the rain falling, what enables me to remember the experience of seeing the rain is the self-knowing direct perceiver that accompanied that eye consciousness at that time. Well, what we focus on, but anyway, it's helpful. So yeah, so there's a question of, well, when we're looking at our mind in the present moment, what is it, that is looking at the mind? Especially when we're looking at our mental consciousness, what is it that perceives the mental consciousness? Yeah. So for the Sutra school, it's a little difficult to explain, because for them, an ordinary being, they pretty much all of their instances of mental consciousness are conceptual. So why is that difficult? Because it seems when we're looking at our mind that we can have a non-conceptual experience of our own mind in the present moment. And according to the Sutra school, the only non-conceptual instances of mental consciousness are our shortest moment in time, that we don't last, and an ordinary being cannot perceive them. So yeah, that's kind of where Paul's question is coming from. Yeah, maybe I want to let some other people ask questions, Paul, so before they all get totally lost. I think there's some questions in the chat box here. Let me look at those first.
I have a comment. When
yeah,
I'm
looking. Okay.
There's definitely to me that there is an observer who is observing the mind consciousness. For me, the two feel totally separate.
The observer and the mind and the mental consciousness?
Yes, when I'm meditating on the mind, the two, there is definitely a separation. And realizing the mind is a creation, I've actually created a second mind because I'm bipolar, and that second mind watches over the one that gets sick. So I've kept myself off lithium for 20 years now using that.
Using what?
Well, because I've created a second mind, because my mind doesn't exist anyway. That second mind watches over the one that gets sick and tells me, hey, that mind's getting a little bit sick today, so I know to relax, what I need to do to stop getting myself unwell.
Okay, well, very skillful, very good.
20 years I've been off lithium now. I'm not saying I'm not cured, but I'm aware that I'm getting sick, so I know to take it easy, what steps to take. Whereas before, it'll be too late.
Right. Yeah, that's exactly. I mean, that's another one of the main points of doing this kind of meditation on the mind, is to generate that perspective of an objective observer of our own mind, right? I mean, we all should try to do that, really. we all want to, because I mean, we all have different states of mind that arise involuntarily, right? Sometimes we feel very sad. Sometimes we feel upset. We feel fear. Fear is a good example. We feel very afraid. And none of us, we feel angry or impatient. It's like we don't think, oh, now I want to be impatient. Now I want to be angry. We don't voluntarily, decide to have fear or worry. They just come, those feelings and thoughts that go with them and the perceptions that go with them, they just arise involuntarily, right? So that's a product of our karma and just our habitual way of relating to different circumstances and kind of being triggered. But even while we have those kind of involuntary mental experiences, we can also generate a sort of objective, self-aware part of our mind, where we look at what's going on with ourselves, and especially with our mind. We look at, what thoughts am I feeling? And it helps to actually ask ourselves questions like this, like, how am I feeling? Physically, how am I feeling? What am I thinking? What are the thoughts that are arising in my mind? And by doing that, we sort of make this separation. We realize that actually, it's not like we just create a separation. There is a separation between what we are as a person and what's happening in our mind. We're not the same thing. But usually we feel like, without kind of doing any analysis, without looking at what's going on in our mind, we often feel like, we conflate ourselves with everything that's happening in our mind. So when we're angry, we just say, we say, I'm angry. And that's not inaccurate, but we reduce ourselves to that emotion of anger. And in doing so, it's like we give up all of our mental capacity to see ourselves from outside, from a neutral, from the perspective of a neutral observer. So,
and can I add something too? That I've also found that when I have these feelings and I observe my body, I find they reside in certain places within my body as well. Mm-hmm. So if I'm angry, or I find it maybe here. If I'm sad, it would be another part. And I've actually learned from doing that we actually have three minds. Two of them can't communicate until one's in the stomach, one's around the heart. This is all to do with the vagal nervous system and all this. And I've actually got really in touch with all this modern science as well.
Okay, yeah, I don't know. There's definitely, another helpful thing about like observing our sense consciousness and being more aware of how we visually perceive things, how we perceive sounds, how we perceive, especially physical sensations in our body, is because all of the emotions that we feel, like anger, fear, jealousy, arrogant pride, they're all associated with subtle physical feelings in the body. So if we can also be aware of subtle physical sensations as they arise in the body in correlation with different mental attitudes, then it helps us to identify more early on and more quickly when we're starting to feel like worried or anxious, when we're starting to feel afraid, when we're starting to feel depressed, when we're starting to feel angry. And then be more proactive about doing something to change, the way we're using our mind, so that we don't just go down kind of those old paths we've been down before, where we just get more and more, the disturbing emotion just escalates more and more and more. So without that kind of subtle awareness of, feelings in our body and also feelings and different kinds of experiences in our mind, then we often don't recognize how disturbing emotions are arising in our continuum until they're really strong, right? So we don't recognize, for example, that we're becoming depressed until we're, our mind is just totally filled with black, ink, and the world just seems horrendous. Or we don't realize we're getting angry until we're, it's like we can barely hold our tongue and we're about to just shout out at someone. Whereas if we practice being more perceptive of physical feelings that we have, and also mental experiences that we have, then we can learn to identify very early on when we're just starting to feel depressed, or when we're starting to feel anxious, when we're starting to get angry. So if we can identify those disturbing emotions at their initial stages, it's much easier to do something to change the way we're directing our attention and change the way we're thinking, so that we don't get into that full-blown like anger or fear and so forth.
And that's something else, because of COVID this year, although it's not really affected Thailand much, we've only had, I think it's 60 deaths here. There's a lot of anxious mentally and physically and financially, because I can't,
Yeah.
and I've actually started doing a grounding practice before I meditate, which I actually visualize roots into the ground, and that's really stabilized my practice as well.
Okay, good. Yeah. So, okay, so back to this. Yeah, so when we're meditating, we want to generate this the perspective of a neutral observer of what's happening in our own mind. But kind of back to Paul's question. Yeah. Anyway, we're kind of, yeah, we're already almost halfway through the second hour. So yeah, maybe let me just check the chat box, see if there's any other pressing questions, and then we'll do some more meditation before taking more questions. Oh yeah, well, is that Shanti saying? Shanti, are you SBC team?
Yeah, my question was answered. Venerable, I mistook Sutra school. I realized it's by Bhashika school. So.
Right. Okay, I see Charu is waving her hand. Charu, you're unmuted. Oh, sorry, I just muted you again. There you go. Okay, I can hear you.
Yeah. I have a question about placement meditation.
Mm-hmm.
So I was wondering, does like placement meditation is on an object? So is this object a visualization, or can it be just simple like a flower or a tree, or can it be a guru or a deity? I mean, what's this placement meditation all about? A little more on it.
Sure, yeah, it can be on any object, Charu. Yeah,
Oh.
it can be, you can do placement meditation on a flower or a tree, or yeah, visualization of your guru, or and even on an attitude. Like say when we're doing like loving kindness meditation, we can generate the attitude of loving kindness towards different people. But then we can also stop kind of the process of generating it and just place our awareness in whatever experience we've generated, and just remain, do placement meditation in that experience.
Okay.
But the thing is, again, I mean, with a flower or a tree or a visual object, generally primarily we try to do placement meditation with the mind. So it's much better if you can visualize like a flower, visualize a tree, and focus on that. It's a much more subtle object, and you'll generate a much more subtle kind of concentration, rather than, if we just stare at a flower, because sense consciousness are they're quite gross. So you won't be able to generate a very subtle kind of concentration by looking at something. Even if if you visualize, if you want to focus on the sound of a mantra, which I know is very common in India, it's better if you can visualize. I mean, sort of visualize means imagine the sound of the mantra, rather than actually making the sound of the mantra. You imagine the sound of the mantra and focus on that, rather than actually verbalizing it.
Yeah. So you do it mentally. That's what I try to do actually.
Mentally, yeah. Yeah, you want to mentally focus on it.
In Buddhism, do they sort of visualize the Buddha or the Tara and focus on that in placement meditation?
Yes, yeah, it's very common. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I'd like to learn this from you formally sometime.
Sure, yeah, sure. We can try.
Yeah, I'm doing it. Yeah.
Okay.
Oh,
Yeah. Yeah.
okay.
So yeah, let's do another short meditation now. Hold on. The main thing, I haven't gotten to the main thing I wanted to explain. So let me just explain something for 5 more minutes, and then we'll do meditation. The main thing I wanted to explain this session is the definition of the mind, right? Which I haven't gotten to yet. But anyway, we've gotten some good experience so far. So the mind is, the definition of mind in Buddhism is that which is clear and knowing, right? So that which is clear and knowing. So I see many of you have your notebooks open, so I'm very happy to see you're writing things down. So you write this down, right? The definition of the mind is that which is clear and knowing, right? So we'll come back. So yeah, there we go. It's in the chat box also. Shanti typed it in. So there's 2 aspects. It's something which is both clear and it is knowing, right? So I'll explain those one by one. But before I do that, let me just write down some synonyms here to the mind. So in Buddhism, when we talk about mind, it's synonymous with awareness and consciousness and knower. Yeah, we can say those 4. Mind, awareness, consciousness, knower. They all mean the same thing. Basically. Yeah, thank you. It's also in the chat box. So, okay, so that which is clear and knowing. So to explain this definition, so what it means that they're synonymous is that mind, awareness, consciousness, knower, they all are that which is clear and knowing, right? I mean, there are slightly different definitions for them, but they all are common in being that, right? That which is clear and known. So the main thing we want to look at is, what do we mean by that which is clear and knowing? First of all, yeah, the main meaning of the clear part, we can understand most easily through an analogy. So think about the analogy of a mirror, right? A mirror is clear in the sense that any object can appear in any visual object, right? Can appear in the face of the mirror, right? So imagine you have a mirror, there's a mirror, and there's light in the room, and then any object which comes in front of that mirror, a reflection of that object will appear in the mirror, right? No matter what the object is. Or another, so that's one analogy for this meaning of clear. Another analogy is of like the sky or space. So any object can appear in space. Like in the space here, I mean, any object that will fit, you know, here's a mouse, here's my phone, this is how I'm connected to you, there's my mug, so any object that can fit in this space can move through this space, can appear in this space. So in that way, the space is like, in one way, it's space because it's free of obstruction, but it's clear in the sense that anything can appear in the space. So that's one aspect. Anything can appear in that space. And then the other aspect is there's no object which is fixed in this space, right? So that's maybe the more important aspect, but the two are kind of like 2 sides of the same coin. So in this space here, my hand is not fixed. It can come into this space and go out, right? My mug is not fixed in the space. It can move into that space and move out of it, right? My head is not fixed in the space. You know, it can be in the space and then be out of it. So, and the same with a mirror, right? Is there any, you know, in any mirror, is there any reflection that's always fixed in the face of the mirror or in the space of the mirror? You know, you all have mirrors in your houses, I'm sure. Is there any reflection that's continually, by necessity, it's always in that mirror? Of course, if you have a mirror hanging on your wall, then it's always reflecting the thing that's just, you know, across the way, like across the hallway from it or whatever. But it's not necessarily that, you know, the wall, you know, the color of the wall paint or the lighting or whatever objects are reflected in the mirror. They're not, none of them are fixed in the space of the mirror, right? Any reflection can come and go and come and go. So in that way, our mind is like that. Our mind is clear in the sense that there's no object or perception that's continually fixed in our awareness, or that we're continually aware of, right? So this is something we can investigate. We will investigate in our own experience. So rather, our mind is it's like a mirror, or it's like space, in that any object that exists can appear to the mind and then disappear from it. And there's no perception. There's no perception of any particular visual object, or any particular sound, or any emotion, or any memory, or any judgment that is always fixed in our awareness, fixed in the space of awareness. Right? So what do you think? We'll look at that in just a minute, actually. That'll be, I think, yeah, we'll make that the main object of our little meditation. Is that true? Right? So, but this definition of the mind is that which is clear and knowing. This clear part, yeah, refers to this fact that any object can appear to consciousness, basically. But I'll come back to that, because there are some qualms. There's some problems with the definition. We'll come back to it. And then the second part is maybe, I mean, I don't know. In one way, it's a little easier, and one way, it's a little more difficult to see. It's a little more difficult because it's just kind of we take for granted. But the mind it's a knower, right? So any instance of mind, awareness, consciousness, it always is aware of something, right? So think about, maybe a simple example is like a taste sense consciousness. A taste sense consciousness, it has to experience some flavor, right? If it doesn't experience any flavor, it's, in what way is it a taste sense consciousness? If the consciousness doesn't experience a visual object, how can we say it's an eye sense consciousness? So any instance of consciousness, it is aware of something. It knows something. In that way, it's a knower. It is conscious of something. I mean, this is what distinguishes. I always find it helpful to compare animate objects from inanimate objects, right? So if you think about an inanimate object, like, well, the one, yeah, like my mug again. This is my favorite prop. I told you, right? So like my mug, it contains liquid. Right now it has water in it, which I need a sip of, actually. But it doesn't. But the mug doesn't know it has liquid in it. Does my mug know that it's holding liquid? It's doing a great job of holding liquid, right? But does the mug know that? Obviously not. No, it doesn't know that. Why not? Because it doesn't have a mind. That's why. I mean, it almost seems, obvious to the point of ridiculousness, but I do find it's helpful. Why are we not an inanimate object? Because we have a mind, right? Because we experience things. So our mind is that which experiences. And remember, when I say our mind, that's a gross simplification, right? It's not that we have this kind of, do I have one mind? Yes. But what does that mean? It means my one mind is it's like a label that I apply to a whole class of phenomena within which there are many different ones, right? Like, to say that, we are, like, I'm a human being. Yeah, it's true, I'm a human being, but what does that mean? It means I belong to this whole class of phenomena which are similar in having, 2 arms, 2 legs, head, having, all the distinguishing features of a kind of human being. It doesn't really say much about, me in particular as a person. So when we think about my mind, actually we're referring to a whole group of very different kinds of things, like eye consciousness, ear consciousness, mental consciousness, and then feelings, happy, sad, thoughts, about, I like this, I don't like this, or just neutral, this is this, this is that, or plans for the future, or memories of the past. So there's all these different kind of mental experiences that we have, right? Those all come under this one label of mind, right? our mind or our mental experience. So, well, I mean, we have to be a little bit careful with the word experience, right? Because that gets a little more unclear. So, I mean, but the main point here that, the mind is that which is clear and knowing, is that the second part, knowing, is what we're looking at, right? Is that any instance of consciousness, it experiences an object, right? It is aware of something. It's conscious of something. It knows something, in the sense that, it knows something in the sense that it experiences something. So here, there's two qualms we need to look at, right? So first, with regard to the clear aspect, I was saying that means any object can appear to consciousness. In general, that's true of consciousness. But if we look at a specific consciousness, right? Like, like our eye consciousness seeing, the laptop screen in front of us, or the computer or the phone screen in front of us. Like I was saying before, like sounds cannot appear to our ear consciousness. I'm sorry, sounds cannot appear to our, as the eye sense consciousness clear. It's not the case that anything can appear to eye consciousness. Well, we can modify the definition for the eye consciousness. It means the eye consciousness is that which is clear and knowing, but there the clear means any object which is suitable to appear to an eye consciousness can appear to it. So any visual object can appear to an eye consciousness. And then you might say, well, you're in South India, so Mount Everest in Nepal can't appear to your eye consciousness. Well, not now, but if I go, if I fly to the base camp, then I will see Mount Everest. Right? So Mount Everest can appear to my eye consciousness, but still, we're still not out of the woods, because if I have a specific eye consciousness. So I have a specific eye consciousness now that's looking at the computer screen. So it's true that, like, say Mount Everest can't appear to my eye consciousness looking at the computer screen. I don't know. There's room for debate, because what if suddenly, like, some Zoom bomber, like, jumps into our meeting and puts up a big picture of Mount Everest on our Zoom room? Then at that time, does Mount Everest appear to my eye consciousness? Maybe, but Paul's saying no. It's a picture of Mount Everest, not Mount Everest, right? But it's true that when we the more we specify the kind of consciousness we're talking about, then the less room we have to say that anything can appear, right? But still, if I have an eye consciousness that's looking in the Zoom room, with all of you in it. So if suddenly Mount Everest or a picture of Mount Everest fills my screen, that will no longer be an eye consciousness looking at all of you in the Zoom. It'll be an eye consciousness looking at a picture of Mount Everest, right? So it will have changed. But the point is that, in that continuum of eye consciousness, no visual object is fixed in the face of that eye consciousness, right? We can turn our head one way and we see other things. We turn our head the other way, we see other things. We close our eyes and we have a different kind of visual experience, right? So, and that's the case with our ear consciousness. Is there a perception of any specific sound that's always present in your ear consciousness? Hopefully not, because if there was, it would probably drive you crazy. I mean, some people, I did hear about one, podcast about, there is some kind of, some kind of ailment where people do have a continual, like, ringing, sound in their ears. But even then, there's some fluctuation. So yeah, our ear consciousness cannot experience visual objects, cannot experience taste or smells, but there's no auditory sound that's always in, that's always in the presence of that ear consciousness. Different sounds, experiences of different sounds arise and pass away, arise and pass away. And then our mental consciousness even more so, because anything that exists, remember, sounds, tastes, visual objects, feelings, anything that exists whatsoever can appear to our mental consciousness. So again, when you specify, there's a mental consciousness thinking about Mount Everest. So to that mental consciousness, it's true that, you know, the zoom room doesn't appear. But the fact is that when I'm thinking about Mount Everest, in the very next moment, I can change and think about, you know, the zoom room, or think about the rain I heard earlier. So there's that perception, any perception, it's in my mental consciousness. It's not fixed there, right? But rather something else can appear. So, so in that way, it's clear, right? So the mind is that which is clear, and knowing is just a second aspect. It's always aware of an object. So why we have to be a little careful the way we talk, because we can say know an object, but we run into a problem when we think about wrong consciousnesses, right? So sometimes we have perceptions that are clearly false, right? For example, we have hallucinations. We might think, you know, we might hear, like at night, we hear some kind of creepy sound outside our window and our door, and we think there's someone out there, right? But then when we go to look, there's no one there, right? So, or I mean, maybe a better example is like, you know, when we're sitting in a bus or a train and we look out the window to one side, and all of a sudden, you know, we're at standstill in the station, the bus station or the train station. We're standing still. We know we just got on, right? We're standing still, and we look outside, and we're waiting for the bus or the train to start moving, right? Because it's time for it to leave for departure. Departure time has come and gone, and we still haven't left yet, right? So we're looking out one side, and then suddenly we see suddenly we feel like we start moving. And we think we started moving, but then we look out the other window and we realize actually the train or the bus next to us just started moving, not ours, right? So for a moment, we had the perception that that we're moving, that our vehicle has started moving. But then when we look at a different reference point, we realize, oh, that's not the case, right? So that's a momentary kind of, it's not a hallucination, it's just well, it's a wrong, it's a instance of a wrong sense perceiver. So, so how does that kind of wrong consciousness, how can we say that it is a knower, that it knows something? Because it's what it thinks it knows, that we're moving, is mistaken. It's actually not the case. Well, there's different ways to explain that. One is just that an object does appear. It is aware of something, right? It is aware of movement, right? When we see the thing next to us moving, we are aware of movement, and we do have the sense of moving. So even though it's not the case that we're actually moving, we are aware of a certain set of appearances. There's the feelings that appear, there's visual objects that appear. And even though we interpret those in an incorrect way, there is some kind of appearance. I mean, another one is like, well, typical in the scriptures is like, you know, when you squint your eyes and you see two moons, there's only one moon in the sky, but you see two moons instead. Still, there is the appearance of two moons, and that, you know, that appears, right? So it is a wrong consciousness, but it still does experience some object. It is a knower in the sense that it experiences an object. Okay, so before you ask any questions, I'll give you a chance to ask questions a little bit later. Let's do some meditation. Yeah. Okay. So get comfortable in your meditation posture. Remember the 8 points I mentioned before. So either your legs crossed or, you know, comfortably arranged in your chair on the floor. And then your torso erect, your shoulders broad and open. Your hands placed, so your right hand on top of the left and the tips of the thumbs touching. And then your hands resting comfortably on your lap, just in front of your navel. The head tilted slightly forward, so the chin tucked a little bit in. And then the eyes direct at about a 45-degree angle down, and withdraw your vision. So let your vision kind of rest unfocused in space in front of you. And then let your mouth and teeth rest in a natural position. And then touch the tip of your tongue to the roof of the mouth, just behind your front teeth. So again, see that your body is relaxed and comfortable. Scan through your body, see that you're relaxed and comfortable. And then just like last time, just briefly begin by noticing your 5 sense consciousness. Just one by one, try to touch, intentionally touch your attention or give your attention just briefly to each of your 5 sense consciousness. Your eyes, ears, nose, tongue, and body. So while we're looking at our sense consciousness, actually, why don't we start asking this question? Is there any object, right? So remember, the definition of consciousness is that which is clear and known. So try to compare this definition to your sense consciousness. You can look at all of them or any one of them. So first, this aspect of clarity. Is there any object that is continually present, sort of in the face of, or continually appearing to any of your sense consciousness? Right, so for example, if we start with our eyes, our sense consciousness, or ear sense consciousness, maybe better. Is there any object that continually appears to all the time? Right? Your eye sense consciousness or your ear sense consciousness? Or is it rather the case that different objects, different perceptions arise and pass away, arise and pass away? So take a minute and check your experience. So we'll keep each step of the meditation a little brief here. So to move to the next step is it the case that any moment of your sense consciousness, so eye, ear, nose, body, tongue sense consciousness, do they always experience an object or know an object? Right? So the first question was, are they always clear in that any object can appear to them? Any object that's suitable to appear to those, can it appear to them? And then the second question we want to focus on now are they knowing in that they always are aware of or perceive some object? So now let's try to withdraw our attention from our sense consciousness and try to focus on our mental consciousness. So one easy way to do that might be to try to look at your thoughts that are rising in your mind, or just look at the one who's the intention to look at your own mind, right? That itself is a mental consciousness. Yeah, and another way might be to try to perceive just this continuity of mental awareness, right? That's not dependent upon the eyes, ears, nose, tongue, or body, but it's just simply awareness arising in the present moment, right? From moment to moment. So when you're looking at your mental consciousness, so remember any judgments or thoughts, memories, plans, or any intention that you have is all mental consciousness. So is there any object or perception, thought, or feeling that's continually fixed in the in the awareness of your mental consciousness, in the experience of your mental consciousness? And here you don't have to stay in the present moment. You can look at the past, look at your past experience and see, is there any thought or feeling or inclination that is always fixed in my awareness? It's always there. Or alternately, is it the case that different thoughts and feelings, and memories, and experiences arise and pass away, arise and pass away? Okay, so let's stop there. I know it's quite short time to meditate, but and I don't know. You can probably hear this blaring horn behind me. I don't know. Sometimes in the monastery they like give out stuff to all the monks, and then their way of announcing that is just to drive a truck around like with all the stuff they're giving out and honk. So they're doing that right now, I think. But these meditations we're doing, the point is sort of more to introduce you to how to kind of do this kind of meditation, and then hopefully on your own you can spend some more time with these things. Is this meditation on the subjective clear light? That's quite a fancy term. I wouldn't really say that. I mean, not really, no. No, it's not, Shandy. But this is meditation on the conventional nature of the mind, right? So this definition of the mind, that which is clear and knowing, that is the conventional nature of the mind. Just that which is clear and knowing is a definition of consciousness or mind, and that is the conventional nature of mind. I mean, conventional nature of mind, it sounds kind of fancy, but it just means like in essence, in entity, what mind is, and that is its conventional nature. That's as opposed to its ultimate nature, which is its emptiness of inherent existence, right? Which is a quality of the mind. It's not what it is, right? So yeah. So basically, when we're meditating on the mind, so hopefully, I don't know. Did you feel some success here? I hope. Yeah. Okay, Charu. Can you unmute yourself, Charu?
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm unmuted.
Mm-hmm.
I had a realization. You were talking about thoughts coming and going in the mind, phenomena coming and going. And I had a sort of a feeling which led to a realization. I had something happened. It was like for a moment, I did not feel like I disliked anybody. I did not feel judgmental. I did not feel, it's very difficult to describe. I just felt a sense of awareness, which was not judgmental, which was accepting of everything, and which realized that existence is forever.
Okay, that's good. Yeah. Then good. Then I mean, if you see some benefit from doing this kind of meditation, then I mean, we only meditated for a very short time, but do it again. Try to do this. Make some notes. If you can't remember, make some notes of what we were trying to focus on, how we were focusing, and then try to do the same meditation again. Although don't do so with the expectation that you have the same experience. No, that's a guarantee for failure. Just do the same procedure again with an open mind, inquisitive, and sort of see what happens.
Okay, but I felt completely disconnected from everything around me. Inside, there was like, some realization was coming up.
Okay,
there was
that's good.
one more
Actually,
thing.
someone else has a question, Shadow. I wanted to give an opportunity to someone else to ask a question. In the chat box, there's a couple more questions. So one is, oh yeah, when I try to meditate on the mind, nothing seems to appear. I try to generate thoughts. So you don't need to try to generate thoughts, and then watch the space, but nothing else appears. Well, in that case, first of all, don't try to generate thoughts. We always want to try to reduce thoughts when we're doing. I mean, well, I should qualify that a little bit. When we're doing placement meditation, we're always trying to reduce thoughts. Here we were doing a bit of placement, a bit of analytical. So when I would ask a question, and then you're trying to kind of answer the question, like I asked the question, is it always the case that, I mean, is there any perception that's always fixed in the space of your mind or in your awareness? So that's a question, and then we need to look at our own kind of experience to see if that's the case or not. But we can also do placement meditation on the mind, in which case we try not to have any thoughts. But in either case, if you're, so, I mean, in where I was just asking the questions, then yeah, you should try to think about, different ways of answering the questions in relation to your own experience.
Yeah, I do
But if you
that
prefer,
when you're asking questions, then I think of the answers. But it's when you kind of say, right now, kind of watch the mind, and it happens all the time. Whenever kind of I get to a meditation point, and it's like watch the mind. It's like that's it, nothing.
oh, that's pretty good though, probably. I mean, because that would indicate that you don't have, for most people, when they meditate, the big problem is excitement, mental excitement, where there's tons of mental chatter and their attention is jumping around from one thing to another, and so they can't focus on anything. So if it's the case that nothing is arising in your mind, it should be quite easy for you to focus your attention on one thing and just keep your attention there. So what I'd suggest you do in this context, when we're meditating on the mind itself, is to try to look back at the observer, right? So who is it that is aware that nothing is arising in the mind, right? What is it that's aware that there's nothing is arising in the mind, right? There must be some observer, otherwise you wouldn't be aware of that fact, right? So what is it that's aware of the fact that nothing is arising? So generally when we're meditating on the nature of the mind, we always want to generate this self-reflexive, looking back again and again. Who is it that's meditating? Of course, one way of thinking about that, who is meditating, is I, the person, am meditating. But we want to look more specifically, I can say I, the person, am holding the pen, right? But why? Because my hand is holding the pen, right? So similarly, when we say I, the person, am meditating, why can we even say that? It's because our mind is doing something. Our mind is meditating, essentially. So whenever you have a doubt about, so this is another way to identify the mental consciousness. But whenever you have a doubt about, just what to look at when we're trying to look at the mind, look at the observer itself, right? And you'll find most people, I definitely find, but you have to do that again and again, turn the observer back onto itself, because we have a very strong propensity to, observe something, see and observe outwards, basically. We turn back to the observer, but then we see something about the observer, and then we externalize that and look at that as if it's something external. And then turn back again to the observer that's observing that, and again back to the observer that's observing that. It's almost like, if you've ever looked at those animations where there's like fractals, and you go like deeper from one layer into another, into another, into another. It can kind of be like that, with meditation on your mind. You're looking at more and more layers of your own mind as they kind of emerge through time. Not necessarily deeper, but just, different experience. Our mind is like a spring. I find this analogy very helpful. A spring, like a spring in the countryside, spring water, where spring water is flowing up from, out of a hillside or out of a meadow or something. And this water is just continually emerging, out of the ground. It's fresh, clear water, hopefully. So our mind is like that, where the ground is time. And in each moment, our mind is continually emerging into the present moment. But it's never different than it was in the previous moment before. So it's very fascinating to watch. But we'll look at that more tomorrow. So today, what I've tried to focus on in these two sessions is, in the first session, what's the importance of meditating on the mind. And the main reason is because we want happiness and we don't want suffering, and because we are the creators of our own happiness and suffering, largely through our volitional activity, our intentional activity. Through our intentional activities of body, speech, and mind, we create karma, virtuous and non-virtuous karma. So when we harm other sentient beings or harm ourselves intentionally, then we create non-virtuous karma. When we intentionally benefit sentient beings, we create virtuous karma, and thereby that gives rise to our own pleasant and unpleasant experiences. And then all the other things I spoke about, like why there's past and future lives, why enlightenment is possible. I didn't go into detail on any of them, but those all relate to the importance of, and also just controlling our own mind, determining what kind of person we are, and what kind of person we become in each moment. In each moment, basically, we are changing in each moment. So whether we make a conscious choice about how we're changing or not is up to us, right? So if we want to be more conscious about what we are, who we are as a person, then we need to pay attention to each moment, how we're directing our attention, how we are interpreting our experiences. If we're interpreting them in a negative way, and complaining, or if we're interpreting them in a positive way and being grateful, is kind of one way to think about it. But to do that in each moment, we need to be aware of what's going on in our own mind. The more we're aware of what's going on in our mind, then the more we have control over how we use this energy of our mind as it emerges in each moment. And the more we can learn to be more and more skillful about using each moment to create something worthwhile, something beautiful, something useful, something beneficial, rather than creating something that's destructive, and harmful. So that's kind of the importance of looking at the mind. And then in the second session, we've been looking more at the conventional nature of the mind, especially what the mind is and different aspects of the mind, sense consciousness versus mental consciousness, how to distinguish, how they function a little bit differently, and then the difference between analytical meditation and placement meditation. So so we'll conclude there for today with a couple of dedication prayers. And then we'll continue tomorrow, same timings. And in the first session, we'll look more at the sort of continuity of consciousness and how our mind is changing moment by moment, how it's impermanent, and how it is a dependent arising. How different causes and conditions give rise to each moment of awareness, and why that's important. And then tomorrow afternoon, we'll look at how the mind, the ultimate nature of the mind, how the mind is empty of inherent existence. Okay, so I'll share my screen now and we'll do some dedication prayers. So first, rejoice in all the effort we put in today, starting with the bodhicitta motivation this morning, or at the beginning. Remember, we visualize all sentient beings, try to generate some attitude of love, loving kindness, wishing for the welfare of all sentient beings, and an attitude of compassion, wishing to free all sentient beings, ourselves and all other sentient beings from suffering. And for that purpose, to ourselves become enlightened. And then think on the basis that bodhicitta motivation, you've engaged in all this activity in the sessions together. So rejoice. And then think of all the virtuous actions engaged in by all other holy beings, Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, as well as ordinary sentient beings like ourselves, in the past, in the present. And rejoice. So this ocean of positive energy, and gather together, we can dedicate with a few prayers. May the precious supreme bodhicitta, not arisen, not yet born, arise. May that arisen not decline, but increase more and more. Samsara and nirvana lack even an atom of inherent existence, and cause and effect and dependent arising are unbetraying. I seek your blessings to discern the meaning of Nagarjuna's thought, that these two are mutually complementary and not contradictory. And I'll skip down to, so just at the end. This one. As long as any sentient being has not been liberated from samsara, may I abide in samsara to help them, even though I achieve highest enlightenment. May I become a wish granting jewel, fulfilling all the wishes, and like a wish granting tree, fulfilling all the hopes of transmigratory beings. By merely seeing, hearing, thinking, or remembering me, as well as by touching me or talking to me. May all suffering instantly be pacified, and may there be happiness forever. And then these two verses. I fully dedicate all these virtues to be able to train just like the hero Manjushri, who knows reality, and just like Samantabhadra as well. I fully dedicate all my roots of virtue, but the dedication praise is the best of the victorious, by the gone beyond victorious ones the 3 times, in order to have good conduct. And then long life prayers for His the wish granting, wish fulfilling jewel, source of every single benefit and happiness in this world, being incomparably kind, supreme, Tenzin Gyatso, may you have a long life and all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. And then for Lamas of Rinpoche, may you who uphold the Sudur's moral way or serve as the bountiful bearer of all, sustaining, preserving, and spreading Majjhima's victorious doctrine. The Master could accomplish magnificent prayers honoring the 3 jewels, the 3 sublime ones. Savior of myself and others, your disciples, please, please, live on. Okay, thank you all very much, and have a good time in between sessions, and see you tomorrow. Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you,
Bye.
Venerable.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you.